Welcome back to Be the Good with Kate, the show that inspires each of us to see how we have the power to make a difference all around us. Each episode highlights an individual doing good in the world while following their passions, good for their own souls and for others. I get so excited about sharing each and every episode of Be the Good with you, and I hope you enjoy these people and stories. If you're new here, welcome, and if you are returning, thank you so much for your support. I'm so glad you found Be the Good with Kate and would love to hear from you. If you're finding value in these episodes, I invite you to share with someone who could also use this dose of good news, or tag me on social with your favorite quote from the episode. Every share, subscriber, review, and comment helps me to share these guests' wonderful work to more people. Thank you for your help in this. Now, on to this week's episode. Let's spread a little more goodness in the world. Welcome back to Be the Good with Kate. I am absolutely thrilled to introduce you to Wendy Swart Grossman. She has a background in U.S. and South African presidential politics. She's a faculty member at Boston University teaching creative innovation and co-founder of Creative Reframe. Wendy is a connector, a community organizer, a thought partner, logistical wizard, visionary advocate, and all-around get stuff done person. She's a published author of Behind the Wheel, A Mother's Journal of a Year on the Road, is working on publishing her second book, and you can also find her writings on WordPress, which will be linked in the show notes. Wendy holds a bachelor's degree in economics and political science from St. Olaf College and a master's in urban and environmental public policy from Tufts University. And I just have to say, the more that I looked into Wendy and learned more about her, the more I wanted to know. And I just couldn't get enough. I went down a rabbit hole on her WordPress site. Her writing just pulls you in. So I can't wait to hear more. Anyway, Wendy, thanks so much for being here.
Okay, thank you so much for finding me and for giving me a platform and really just giving me an opportunity to have a chat with you. I am excited for this. Yes.
Oh, absolutely, my pleasure. And just for the listeners, our connection came through Remy, who will have just been released a couple weeks prior to this episode. So you will have been fresh off of hearing about the Azores there.
Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely. So Wendy, please tell everybody a bit more about who you are and what you do in your own words.
Yeah, well, so I'm kind of a peripatetic kind of person. I've moved around a ton in my life. And I think through that, I have really committed myself to building community because I really didn't have it when I was growing. I always had to recreate it wherever it was that I was living. So I've always been a community builder from, the time I was a kid to knocking on doors, looking for friends, to moving to the UK, to moving to London, moving to Atlanta, Georgia, moving to San Francisco, moving here to Boston. And so I've really dedicated myself to pulling people and groups together, as well as for a greater purpose. Social impact. I kind of actually think of it as like a triangle of things that I'm really committed to. The three pillars of what I care about. And one is community. The second is social impact. And the third is creativity. I see creativity as a great opportunity to pull people together to actually have an impact, to push forward our hopefully shared agenda item of world peace. So.
And now, how did you realize that this could be a career path? Obviously you are someone who finds the way to be the good in all aspects of your life. And it was so apparent in everything I read about you too. It's not just your work. It's a part of your being that's so apparent. But for the work aspect of it, how did you know, maybe going to college or after college, that, oh, I'm going to be a professor, I'm going to be in the creative field? Like, how'd you find that?
Okay, I wish I could tell you it was all plotted out, but it never is, man. Life is just so funny. I just think it's fascinating, just the pivots in our lives and how we then I'm 6 years old now, and I look back on these different pivots in my life, and I start to then tell myself the story. Oh, well, of course that made sense. And then I thought of it. It's like, no, we're all just like going through life by the seat of our pants, trying to figure it out, right? And so, really, my first job out of college, was I went to college in Minnesota, in a small little town up on Manitou Heights, so that we were closer to God. It was a Norwegian Lutheran college, but I was hired on my college campus to come be a community organizer with the PIRGs, the Public Interest Research Groups, which is Ralph Nader. It's all about consumer activism and environmental activism. And I actually had really no idea what I was signing up for when I got a job. I thought, oh, cool. It pays, it pays enough money to live on. I get health insurance, and it gives me an opportunity to get out of that small town in Northfield, Minnesota, and have an adventure. And so they had college campuses across the country. And I said, they asked me where I wanted to go. And I said, Boston, Massachusetts. Why? I'm not too sure. It was a place I'd never been to before. I just thought, ooh, this sounds cool. And I came here and I was a student organizer, pushing. And it's when you work for small, scrappy organizations that actually don't have a lot of people power, they give everybody a lot of autonomy and a lot of opportunity to grow. So like really within 3 months, I was leading press conferences on the new studies that were coming out. And I'm like, I had no idea how this even, I really, what this study was about. I was doing my talking points, but I learned so much. And I did it just for a year. But that was like my really an opening to this whole world of advocacy. And that even though I was 22 years old, I could have a voice. And I was looking down. I was working with college students, and I was helping them to actually to galvanize their voices as well, while I was figuring it out myself. So immediately as I was learning something, I was then teaching it to somebody behind me and figuring out how we could build these movements. And then from there, I realized that I wanted to do something more than that, though. I wanted to get out of the PIRGs. It was, I wanted to have even a larger impact. But I didn't really know it at the time. And so I did what everybody does. I got a job as a waitress. And that's where I met Molly Lipsky. Molly Lipsky was a customer who would come in every Tuesday with her husband Sal for the 2-for-1 special at Matt Garrett's. And I knew so much about Molly. She would always ask to sit in my section. She really was, I asked her a lot of questions because I realized that the more that I got to know my customers, quite frankly, the bigger the tip, right? That's what I was about. But she was lovely. And I was living in Boston with no family or friends around, and I was making friends, but just so cultivating that relationship. And then there was one day I was talking to the busboy in our shared language, which was French. He was from Haiti. And all of a sudden, Molly looked at me differently. And she said, wow, Wendy, why do you speak French? I said, well, I took, 3 semesters of it when I was in college. And she looked, and then she said, you went to college? And I said, yes, I went to college. And I studied economics and political science. And she said, well, then why are you a waitress? Like, well, this was not the end goal, but I'm doing this. I need to pay rent. And she said, well, what is it that you really want to do? And I had the answer. I said, I want to use my voice to help advocate on behalf of people who don't have voices on the statewide level. And she said, this is what you need to do. I am a volunteer from Michael Dukakis, who's running for re-election for governor in Massachusetts. He's going to win. They're just gearing up the campaign. Go and be the best volunteer you possibly can be. They will be looking to their volunteer pool for staff members. And then you will be hired if you let them know, if you're good, and if you let them know that's what you want to do. And so I went down and I started volunteering. I was the best volunteer they had. They offered me the position as a receptionist after like 4 months. And I was so offended. I'm like, a receptionist? Come on, I've had a year of experience. I've got a, undergraduate degree. And they said, but my boss at the time said, or to be my boss said, don't worry, take the job anyway. Everybody will just remember how good you did at the job, not what the job was. So I took the job, and I very quickly saw that the volunteer coordinator wasn't very good at his job, and that I was quietly doing his job behind his back. I was being welcoming. I was helping people understand the importance of what the envelopes were that they were stuffing, and really creating a community among the volunteer pool. The campaign director saw what was happening. They fired him. They put me in the position. So now I was the statewide volunteer coordinator for the gubernatorial campaign. The governor then won re-election. At the age of 23, I was sitting in the corner office of the State House in the governor's office for a private meeting with the governor. And he was saying, so Wendy, you are a fabulous employee. We'd be honored to have you in any position in state government. And I ended up working for him for a couple of years doing refugee and immigrant policy work. And then he decides to run for president. And I was called back to the presidential campaign. And so that then led me to a whole career in presidential politics. So I worked, then I was running the national campaign headquarters for the volunteers. I ended up organizing congressional districts around the country. That then we did, as my husband says, who I met on the campaign, we came in second. And we met each other. And then we ended up, that ended up parlaying into, for the White House, for the Clinton administration in 1992. I ended up working, doing scheduling, White House Office of Scheduling in Advance. But this is all thanks to Molly Lipsky, who I was, waiting tables with. So you never know who how your life is going to change.
I love that. And there's definitely a theme with a lot of my guests, or maybe even I could say all of my guests, if I were to really dive into it, of no one went to college and said, this is what I'm going to do for the next 50 years. And I have it laid out and it happened that way. Nobody. And
that would be so boring, Kate. That would be so boring. And I have to say, like, that after having like showstopper jobs like that, it's an adrenaline high as well. I mean, I go to there I was, 26 years old, going to parties. And I remember at a party with at a bunch of MBA students at the University of Minnesota, and they're all like, oh, what do you do? And then somebody asked me what I did, and I'm like, well, I organized congressional districts around the country for the presidential candidates. And it's like next thing you know, I've got a whole like group of people around me saying, what? How did this happen? What's that like? And anyway, so it's been, and then you start paying attention to what else you could do that's really filling you up, and it's helping to create the change that you want to see in the world and that you want to be in the world. It's like, but it really is. It's taking those opportunities.
Yes. And you were so open to talking to people. I mean, that's, again, something just to really point out. You were waiting tables and this customer, it's not like you were at a fancy networking event with college, colleagues from college or whatever. You were waiting tables and this person happened to connect with you because you were warm and welcoming. And that led to this whole path.
Well, exactly. And it's so funny because I actually do a lot of in the classes I teach at Boston University to both graduate students and undergraduates. It's called Creative Startups: From Ideas to Impact. I take them through a whole semester of where do ideas come from? How do you know if your idea sucks or not? You question, ding dong. It's a little note on how do you know if your idea sucks or not? Usually it does. And don't get too attached. But a lot of the workshops that I do are on storytelling for authentic connection. And it's like, I don't even like to use the word networking anymore because that's so transactional. And what you really want to get at is authenticity. And that comes from being curious. Curiosity and generosity are two words that I use a lot in the work that I do.
And then how did you get this course to be at Boston University? Did you offer it to them? Did they have it already and you took it on?
This again is another serendipitous situation. We lived, my husband and I and our two kids lived in London for 6 years. We came back to the US in the worst economy possible. And at that point, 2009. And we, instead of just buying a house and getting jobs, we bought a Winnebago Itasca Impulse 29-footer, and we lived in it for a year and homeschooled our kids in the national parks and public libraries, and also trying on different cities where we would want to live. And after looking at Austin, Texas, and Palo Alto, and San Francisco, and Seattle, Washington, and Minneapolis, we chose specifically to live in Boston, and in particular in Brookline, so that it's a very walkable city. The kids could go to the public schools. And my son at that point was in second grade. And there's a little girl named Claire Gilliman who came up to him and said, "Oh, you just moved here. I bet you don't have any friends. I'll be your friend." So Claire came over and, met the hamster. And And then the following week, I was raised Christian. My husband was raised Jewish. So of course we become Unitarian Universalists. We go to the Unitarian church in our community. And the same little girl, Claire, is singing in the choir. We see her after class, afterwards in the coffee hour. And she says, "Oh, Wendy, I bet you don't have any friends either. Why don't you come meet my mom?" I met Jen. Jen and I immediately hit it off. And she, at that point, was worked at Boston University in the College of Fine Arts. She was the director of the visual arts program. We went out for a drink one night, and she's one of these people who asks you the big questions. I love it. And she's really intense. She's like, what do you really want to do? What would be fun? What would make your heart sing? And I'm like, oh, I always thought it'd be fun to teach. And then she's like, oh, well, I work at BU. And I can present a class. And I was also a graduate of the arts administration program. And they were asking her to propose a potential class. And we thought, wouldn't it be fun to co-teach a class together? With me with my activism and her with her art background, we proposed a class on the artist as activist. So we went to the director and he said, "That's fascinating, but what's really interesting is this whole thing called cultural entrepreneurship. It's kind of popping up right now. Can you dive into this and see what you can come up with?" So we proposed the class that was really all about helping the artists get the tools that they need to bring their ideas to market. Because so many artists just, they dig into their craft, but they don't understand the importance of, business opportunities and business skills and how to actually market and how to price. And then the class was a huge hit. And so Jen and I, we went from being just a piloted during the summer to being part of the full-time curriculum. And at the same time, across all the colleges and universities, these ideas of the innovation entrepreneurship centers were starting to pop up. And there was something called Innovate at BU. This was in 2016 that was just starting to get its feet on the ground. And they caught wind of the work that we were doing because I'm kind of loud. And, and we were getting a lot of splash. And I have no problem. I come also too from a PR marketing background. So it's like, I know how to sell my stuff. And so we're getting a lot of play. And then we were asked to submit to do a TED Talk. And at BU, and so Jen and I put together a TED Talk, and in the core and during the teaching the class or putting together the TED Talk, we realized we also had a business here called Creative Reframe, but was based in the class. So the class then, because also the innovation entrepreneurship was getting off the ground, and because we were really teaching cultural entrepreneurship, the class is now morphed into creative startups from ideas to impact. And I'm now going to be teaching in the business school in the innovation and entrepreneurship minor, which is the 4th largest minor now at Boston University with the 35,000 students. It's really, so it's fascinating. It's fascinating.
Oh my gosh, I feel like I have 100 questions, but I will just go to the crux of one thing that just keeps going to my head is, well, first for the listeners, Wendy and I also realized we both have this arts administration background. That was my major at Butler. And I'm like, oh, I am sending this the minute it's released to my advisor from college. Right. She will love hearing about this because arts administration, when I went to college, there were maybe 5 programs that I could find in the entire country that had it as an undergrad. And now there's all these other variations on it, like what you're doing at BU. And to hear that this minor, it was called innovation. What was that?
Innovation and entrepreneurship.
And entrepreneurship is like one of the most popular minor. That's incredible. And it just really shows too that people are lit up by this. They want to find their passion.
Oh, absolutely. And this is, obviously since the COVID and even before then, there's been this whole drumbeat about how do you actually have the skills for what skills you actually need for the jobs of the future. And it really comes down, and whether you are an innovator or an entrepreneur, actually start a business or not, you still need those skills. Whether you are, it's either an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur, someone who works at an existing company, but yet you have that creative mindset and that entrepreneurial, innovative way of looking at things. So you're always thinking about the next thing. And that intersection of what the world needs with what you're good at, with what your purpose is, and what actually pays, and where that all comes together in that Venn diagram.
I love it so much. And I just love too that we're not in the world where you need to have that at age 22. Like you have found so many different segments of your passions already, and you're still going and going and going. And so this is where I normally ask about good news moments along the way, but I feel like you have filled this conversation with good news moments. But are there any people that you've worked with or students you've worked with that have really stood out that you'd like to share about?
So a beautiful story I have is about Ines Andrade and Eduardo Carpendero. Both of them were graduate students getting their doctorates in performance piano. And Ines is from the town of Bendada in Portugal, up in the mountains close to the Spanish border. And it's a town that needs a lot of economic development. It had been actually known for its music, but similar to a lot of small towns, they had a big brain drain. There were no jobs, so a lot of people ended up in Lisbon. So when she was growing up, she would always go back to Bendada because her grandparents had a house there and a family home. And the EU puts a lot of money into culture. And when she was in graduate school at Boston University, she went home for Christmas. And the EU had put money and built at a beautiful new concert hall in the little town of Bendada, a town of maybe 1,000 people. And the people she was asked to come give a Christmas concert, a piano performance. And she did, and it was beautiful. But all she could think about was, this hall is not being used properly. It could be used every day. How can we use it? So she signed up to take my class, and she workshopped her idea for a music festival in her town of Bendada that not only would bring music into the town, but it would be an economic driver and tourism and help, and also bring students into the town of Bendada to give them intense music experience in the little village. And the next year, Eduardo took my class to help get it to the next level. And then in 2019, they invited me to come and to teach some workshops. They're now in their 7th year of the Bendada Music Festival. It's actually happening right now. It will in July of 2023 in the little town of Bendada. You need to go. They had the most incredible concerts in different villages in the hill communities all around Bendada, in old churches, in coliseums and castles. And it's all students that come from around the world. And they're actually now starting to play out having different events throughout the year as well. So that's just like, does it get any better than that? To actually help your students get the skills that they need so they can put into action the dreams that they see. And then to have them hire you. Well, that's a little too fabulous. Yeah. And I have a number of stories like that. I've actually have some great data on the number of students who've gone through my program, and 40% of them have actually started their own ventures. Wow. And it's just, and that's what gives me hope. I'm always looking for hope and inspiration. And I'm so lucky to be able to work with so many incredible students. And because, I'm here to say that, it is not hell in a handbasket out there. The students at Boston University, and I also taught at Tufts University last year as well, they are ready. They're up for the challenge. They see the problems, of the world on fire, and they are getting the tools that they need and to get the skills that they need so that they can help combat these problems. And they need our help. So.
And this is why, I have this show. This is why I love reading about the positive news stories, because it's so important to have that reminder. Yes. Because we hear plenty of the negative, and we need to know what's going on, but there's so much more, and there's so much goodness. There's so many forces for good. So I'd love to hear that. And going beyond your work, I know that, again, you're a force for good throughout your whole life. You mentioned that you give your porch over to the music festival there at Brookline, and you have a community home, and there is a community swing in your front yard, please.
Oh, it's so funny. One time I was out watering in my garden, and we had an apartment building next to me, and a guy had just moved in, and I'm an early riser. So it's like 6 a.m. in the morning. I'm out there watering, and he's sitting out in the front of the apartment building, and he looks over at me and he said, "Is that some kind of community center?" No, it's just my house, but I've got my garden, I've got a swing, I've got a little library. And if I can figure out how people, having traveled around having been lonely a lot as a child growing up, I know that there's so much loneliness that is out there. And if there's any way that I can be an inviter and a gatherer and help somebody else not feel so lonely, and it's like, great. There's nothing that makes my heart sing more than when I come walking around the corner onto my street and there's a whole bundle of kids who I don't even know hanging out on the swing, having a good time. But usually there's at least one or two kids who I do know. And I walk up to the swing and say hello to everybody. And Isabella will say, you have to know what the rules are of the swing. And one of them is if you see Wendy, you have to have a little chat.
How did that get started? Like, you put up a swing, but how did you end up with the whole community coming by?
Because it starts with the first of a couple of kids. It's because we live in a very urban area, and it's unusual to have a swing in your front yard. And because whenever I'm out there, I'm saying, "Come on, you're welcome to." Whenever I see somebody, I say, and there's lots of little nurseries and stuff, and people stop by to use the little library, and I make sure to know. And what I do need to do is I just need to make a sign and say, "This is a community swing," that anybody's welcome to use it. And so anyway, and also when my kids were little, obvious, they were, it was a magnet for the neighborhood that we live in. So,
and in this time too of like, we don't always know our neighbors. People aren't as, just on top of like always saying hi to your neighbors or extending the hand. It's so great to hear stories like this where you have people there all the time and you're embracing them.
Yeah. Well, I feel like it's like when you have stuff, you should share it. It's like it's a lot more fun that way, So
yeah. Wendy, I have to ask, with your whole career and just life thus far, are there any mantras or sayings that you keep going back to?
I think it's leading with intention. And taking time, and also paying attention. Intention brings attention, right? And if you and vice versa, it's like if you actually start to pay attention, then it's like, okay, then what's really important to me? And this is this is a short time that we are not dust in this world. And it's important to pay attention to the time that we're not dust and make the most of it, and to be the example for others that you wish that you had, quite frankly. Yeah.
And that leads absolutely perfectly into my next question. If someone comes to you and they say, I want to make a difference too, but I'm feeling overwhelmed, I don't know where to start, what advice would you give them?
Start small. It's like just do one little tiny thing. It's like pick up a piece of trash, or just look at, when you're walking down the street. This is something that I like to do especially when I'm feeling sorry for myself. I don't know if I'm having a little pity party for myself. It's like, or feeling, lonely or whatever. It's about a connection, one small connection. And when you walk past somebody and you're like, oh, that's a great pair of shoes, tell them that. Hey, great shoes. And it's like, oh, I love your hat, or just something. It's just a little tiny thing like that. Then all of a sudden the person will see you and you will make their day. 100% you will. And it's like, it doesn't cost you anything. It's just a few words, and it fills up your tank. It's like nothing, right? It's like, okay, here's this. Speaking of which, I love your hair. I love your earrings. I'm looking at you right now on the Zoom screen. You're looking good there, Kate.
Why, thank you. There's also now a lot of studies that are showing the benefit of those micro interactions too. I'm sure
absolutely.
You've seen them, and they give us those feel good hormones and chemicals through our system and to the other person as well.
Yeah. And I think this goes back to when I was in graduate school. One of the big book that really kind of changed my life was Habits of the Heart, which talks about the importance of community and happiness. And then, of course, the book Bowling Alone, which is also again about the importance of community and how do we build those connections. And now there's just so much more that's out there on, on happiness studies, but it's about connection. It's about connection and community and not getting so absorbed in yourself. So.
Oh, and speaking of books, one last question. Tell us more about Behind the Wheel and the book, because the title alone, I'm like, oh, I need to check that out.
Yeah. So this was started when we lived in the RV for a year. And I just started blogging just because because I was kind of going insane living in the RV, at 29 feet with, my husband who didn't talk a lot, my 12-year-old who was going through puberty, and my 7-year-old. And, I was perimenopausal. I mean, what the hell were we thinking? So anyway, so it was a way of kind of keeping me sane and just kind of just telling ridiculous stories. So really I am a storyteller. So that's really, it's a journey of our life going from our house in London into a Winnebago. And then ultimately we actually stopped the RV trip early, or else I was going to kill somebody, quite frankly. So then at the end, I had all these blogs, and I basically strung the blogs together. And my husband, who's a great champion of mine, I love being married to a cheerleader, really was encouraging me to go ahead and publish it, which was fun. And just going through that whole experience. And again, it's like, I turned myself into a writer, and having my kids watch me. And it's like, okay, yeah, this is what mom did in London. This is what mom's doing now. And it's like, they've seen all the pivots in my life. And it's like, yeah, you can be a writer too. This is what you just start doing it. So, and it gave me an opportunity to gather a different community, and to be able to tell my story and National Public Radio. I put together a whole book tour. I'm happy to go to your book group, Kate. I travel. For a glass of white wine, I'll go anywhere. No.
I love it. Well, actually, speaking of white wine, the last of the WordPress entries that I got to read before I finally had to say, oh my gosh, I have to do some work, was the one about when you give mom a night off.
Oh,
and
yes.
So I loved it. I mean, the listeners, you have to go check out Wendy's website and more about her. You'll love reading more. It was so cute. As the give a mouse a muffin or cookie. What
yes, exactly. Yes.
But for mom having a night to that.
Out. Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Wendy, speaking of, where can people follow you? And this will also be in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. We're at creativereframe.com is my website, for my partner and I, Jen Gilliman. And then for my creative writing, it's just absurdmusingsblog.wordpress. And obviously feel free to link into me. Write me a note so I know how we know each other. Write me a note on the Creative Reframe, has a contact us spot as well. So I'm happy to follow up with any of your listeners. I love it. So. Oh,
Wendy, I cannot thank you enough. And I sure hope that our paths cross again soon off camera too, because you are just a delight.
Oh, I'm inviting you right now. Come to Porch Fest in Brookline. It's going to be September 30th, 2023. We live in the big purple house with the swing. Come on by.
Got to get to that swing. Wendy, thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome, Kate. This has been a pleasure.
In taking classes over the years or observing workout videos, one major piece that is often missing: stressing safety and form. Additionally, group fitness classes are often marketed as being open to all levels, yet how often do instructors not give modifications nor progressions so that each participant truly can get what he or she needs out of the class? So that's why I created the 101 series, which take things back to basics with 3 separate courses: Bar 101, Pilates 101, and HIIT 101, focusing on safety and efficiency so you can maximize your workouts. Be confident when you step into a group fitness class or workout on your own. Be strong in your execution of the most common exercises, and be proud of yourself for taking these huge steps forward on your health journey. Check it out at bebykate.com. The link is in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening to Be the Good with Kate Cherichello. Whether you're listening on YouTube or via podcast, it would mean the world if you liked, subscribed, and or left a review. You heard about the good? Now go out and be the good in your life this week. If you have stories of good news that need to be shared, please send me a message. Thanks again, and have a great week.